going to, okay. All right. And then I think when I hit share here, it will pop up on the screen. Okay. So can you guys see the slides now?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me to give this workshop. I am excited to share this knowledge with you guys. As Eduardo said, it wasn't that long ago that I was on the market, but it's been long enough ago that I now have students that are on the market. And so I had put this packet together last year and started doing this and have also offered it for my department as a whole. And so I mentioned to the MIF board that I could do this for the Minority Issues Forum. So this is advice about how to the documents that need to be in your job packet and what specific content should be on there. We're also going to talk about the timeline of the academic job search. And as I go through each of these, I have done this in a 2-hour format. Today, we're going to do 1 hour. And so to reach that, I'm really going to focus on just a couple of documents, but I'll hit the highlights on all of them, I think. And as we go along, feel free to stop and ask questions, especially when we get into the details of, for example, what should be in a cover letter or what should be in your research statement. Okay. All right. And so before we get going, though, I wanted to ask those of you that are in attendance, can you just quickly drop into the chat whether you're like on the market this year or you're just here to get some information for the future? So I want to see who's on the market now. Okay. So all right. Thank you guys for these responses. Okay. All right. So it looks like we've got a mix, but looks like a little bit more than half of you are on the market this fall. Okay. All right. That's good to know. Okay, so one other disclaimer as we go through this, I'm going to do my best to talk about these from both the engineering and business school perspective, but my degree as well as my job have been in engineering, so that definitely heavily influences my perspective. So I wanted to bring that to the forefront, but on several slides, I'll try to distinguish what might happen between going to an engineering school versus a business school. Okay. So job announcements are hitting the Informs Connect board. They're already starting to hit. I have here August to November, but really many of them are already hitting. So keep an eye out for that. I use Informs Connect heavily to grab most of my announcements. You can also find them a few other places, but that's really the main source that I recommend. And if you're also a part of any societies such as MIF or WORMS or other specialty sessions, then you can also track a few there as well. So most of the time, you're going to start submitting these packets as early as October, especially for the business schools. They tend to be more on what I refer to as the front end of this process and move a bit faster in terms of the entire hiring cycle than the engineering schools do. And also at Informs, which is in mid-October this year, some of them will reach out to you and ask to catch up with you at those sessions. There'll also be several tables there. It's been kind of slow the last couple of years because of COVID, but now that we're all fully back in person, I expect it's going to be a big ramp up this year with lots of tables at the Informs annual meeting. Now, after that, you'll start to get requests to do some, used to be phone calls back in the day, but now it's Zoom. So there will be Zoom interviews going on. Those are typically, I've heard as short as 10-minute rapid fire meetings. I've heard about a few of those, but most typically, I think they're about 30 minutes, no more, some of them an hour, but a lot of them around 30 minutes Zoom interviews that happen in November and February. Then, from there, a few of the business schools do have some on-site interviews in December, but for the most part, you'll start to get on-site requests in January, February, March. and then those offers coming out February, March, and April. So this is a big cycle here. I'm running from August to April. And so one of the things I've always said is it's like a full-time job to get a job in academia because of the number of packages you need to prepare and the amount of time and effort it takes to manage this particular cycle. So one other thing I want to say about today, in this session, I'm mostly focusing on the packets you need to prepare to submit. At this time, today's session is not going to focus on the interviews as much, but I'm happy to have conversations with you guys offline, or we could consider doing a follow-up session in the fall about how to prepare for the interviews. Okay, so moving into the differences between business and engineering, and hopefully a lot of you are already familiar with this, especially if you're going on the market. Hopefully your advisors have prepared you, but if not, this is sort of my difference between the two. I would say I would say it's worth the effort to apply to both, even if you are pretty niched into one of these, but you never know. Though there are some differences you should be aware of and something that you should think about as far as where you want your to spend your focus. So if you're going to go to a business school versus engineering, there's differences in publications, students, teaching requirements, and grant requirements. So at a business school, there is a higher, a more sincere focus on certain journals. They have a much more select list of publications in the ORMS community that they would like to see you publish in. And so you need to be targeting one or two journal publications a year there. In relation to that, and hitting down to the next bullet point under business, a lot of the research in business schools is often still done by you as a faculty member. Because there tend to be less PhD students in the business program. So you yourself are still doing a lot of the algorithms and analysis. So that's something to keep in mind. Comparing that to engineering, the number of publications to get tenure tend to be higher number of expectations. But from my perspective, there's been a lot more flexibility in terms of defining what journals represent your research area. So for example, even I work in optimization and simulation in healthcare. And so there are journals across all of those that specialize in healthcare or simulation or optimization. And I can sort of like define to what it means to be in my particular area. That being said, to hit that higher number of publications in engineering schools, we tend to have a larger number of students. There can be a lot of top very good students, especially if you're at a higher, end up taking a job at a highly ranked institution. That also means that a lot more of your job becomes more student management. So managing these students, their progress through the PhD program. There's training early on when they begin your program, but you can begin once you get them established, you can begin to rely on them more for doing a lot of the coding and analysis and preparing those publications. A few more differences between these. Business schools tend to have a higher expectation in terms of number of courses you're teaching per year. Often I've seen 4 to 5 classes a year, especially with requirements to teach in the MBA programs at the business schools. In engineering schools, you'll actually have a lighter workload the first year or two of maybe only teaching 1 or 2 courses a year. But ultimately sort of like steady state in engineering is you're teaching about 3 classes a year. So like 2 in the fall, 1 in the spring, or vice versa. But I've also seen some smaller engineering departments still have that 4 course a year requirement. If it's a small department, then there's more needs that are placed on the staff to teach the required courses. Now, the last thing I'll talk about with business versus engineering, in business, while you are doing a lot more of the work and hitting those very select public journals, one of the nicer things is there's less pressure to get grant funding. You it's definitely still possible, and it's a nice bonus on your tenure and promotion packet if you do end up with funding. But there's not this immense pressure to submit grants all the time that you would see in engineering school. In engineering, it's expected that you're going to be the PI on, for example, in my department, it's very clear that you need to be the PI on one external award before you go up for tenure and promotion. So those are the main differences. Clara, Eduardo, do you have any further comments on this that you want to share?
So I mean, for example, I'm also in the small category for a department, and we teach 2 and 2 every year. So that will be, in our case, that will be the teaching load. But what we have seen is even small departments right now are pushing for a lot of research. So even if you're in a more, you have a higher teaching load, engineering schools are still pushing for you to do research, and expectations are that you publish papers in good journals, and also to bring funding. So just wanted to mention that.
All right, thank you, Eduardo. Okay, all right, so now that I've sort of laid the groundwork there on the differences, there's actually still a lot of similarities in actually preparing the job packets. The conversations might be different in the interviews, but the main documents are still needed whether you're applying to business or engineering schools. So that's what we're going to focus on for the rest of today's session. So this is a list. I'm not going to claim it's a comprehensive list, but this is the list of job packet materials. So I've divided this up. On the left here, I have what I refer to as the core packet. And so the ones that are in blue that have the little play button next to those are the 3 that we're going to focus on in today's session. But I actually have a slide across all 8 of these. So the core packet, what you're going to absolutely see in every single one of these is there needs to be a cover letter. Sometimes it's going to be an actual written like Word document or PDF, and sometimes it's actually something that you kind of copy and paste into the submission portal. But generally there is a cover letter in this in every packet, and we're going to talk about what types of content needs to be there. Obviously, a CV is required. Those of you who are on the market, hopefully you have your CV developed. I have a slide on this, so we'll talk briefly about it, but hopefully this is something you've already done with your advisor and have started to craft. And the reason I say that hopefully you have a CV, I'm talking about the fact that maybe when you finish your undergraduate, it may have been a brief resume, but a CV or curriculum vitae is definitely a lot longer and more involved. There is no page limit per se. And so make sure that you know what needs to be there. Now, the 2 documents that you're probably most interested in hearing about today are the research and teaching statements. So that's what we're going to focus a lot on. And we'll get to those very soon. So the other 2 things on the right side of your screen under other materials, sometimes in addition to the teaching and research, I've seen some universities asking for a diversity statement. This was already starting to happen when I was on the market in 2017, but especially since 2020, there's been an even bigger increase, I think, in universities asking you to have a statement. One of my students last year even had to include slides about their stance on diversity and inclusion and their actual job talk when they went for the on-site interview. So that's something that we'll discuss if we have time as well. You also have a list of references. Certainly your advisor should be there, but we can also talk about some other suggestions for who you can include. There's typically about three, but sometimes up to 5 references that you would include in your packet. Then we also have teaching evaluations. Not all of you may have that. And if not, I've got some advice there that we'll touch on. And then from what I've seen, about half of universities ask you to actually submit example publications when you're applying as well. All right, so let's move into the cover letter. So a cover letter is about 1 page, sometimes 2. I'm going to show you an example of mine here in just a moment. And one of the reasons I think I had a 2-page one was because I did a postdoc. So I had more to say than someone just finishing their PhD. So it's up to you and the font that you want to use, but it's generally 1 to 2 pages. You try to address this to the chair of the search committee. Sometimes in the job announcements, you'll clearly see who the chair is. Sometimes it's not as clear. You want to spend the first paragraph introducing yourself, the second paragraph talking about your research, the third paragraph talking about your teaching. If you have significant service worth mentioning, that can also be in there as well. And then your last paragraph is just more of a formality in closing. So as promised, I'm going to show you guys an example of what mine looked like. And let's see, where did it go? Okay. All right. Okay. So mine was a bit longer, like I said, because I had a postdoc, and I think I have another example that I'll show you guys. But in this case, I was able to know exactly who the chair was and was able to address them directly. If you don't know who the chair is, then you can write an informal, like you can either say to whom it may concern, or you can just say like, dear faculty search committee. That's another general way that you can address them. So in your first paragraph, this is where you want to say that what you're applying for. And that can be important, by the way, because sometimes they've got multiple lines. They're searching to fill multiple positions, maybe some, like at UF, sometimes we've got 2 or 3 because we're searching for a lecturer, someone in human factors and someone in OR. So make sure that you can specify that your intentions there if you can. Then you say like what department you're from, and kind of close with like your general description of your research. But these next, in this case, should be 1 paragraph, but I had 2 because I was a postdoc. But generally, you then talk about your research. I would lead that off with what exactly it is you're doing, because even if you have already established, let's say that you're applying for human factors, there's still so many different niche areas in that domain, and so you want to clearly establish like what is it that you are known for or want to be known for, in terms of where you're going to go with your 5 years building to tenure and promotion. You want to talk about your research as well. So I'm not, but sort of keep it brief. You're still trying to hit the highlights there. Another thing is talking about teaching. Hopefully you have maybe had the opportunity to be the primary instructor for a course, or have had a lot of experience as a teaching assistant. Even if you have never been a primary instructor, you can, but maybe you've gotten to give some guest lectures, or maybe teach some labs for the courses, or some review sessions for the courses that you've TA'd. You can definitely mention that there. I also talked about my service as well, because I did a lot of service for both Informs and IISE when I was a student. So I bring that into mine as well. And then the final thing is just a general statement of, if you can find these materials in my packet, I'm happy to furnish more. Now, another thing, and it's not in this particular letter, but another thing you could add here at the bottom is, if you're applying, especially if you're going for business schools, they tend to have their deadlines and announcements out earlier. and are asking for you to meet with them at the informs, then I've actually seen them ask you to put in here, I will be attending the informs, the 2022 informs annual conference. My sessions will be Tuesday, 3:15, etc. And you can actually put in the specifics of when your talk is going to be. Or maybe you have a poster and you can mention that as well. So if you're sending these packets in prior to the conference, you can put those specifics into this document. Okay. All right. Let's see. I was going to show you. I have permission from my colleagues to share another one of these. So I'm going to pull up one more cover letter. That's a so this is one of my colleagues, Mustafa Risi. He came straight from Georgia Tech into UF, PhD directly into a faculty position. And so his follows a bit more of that format that I mentioned to you. So he introduces himself here, talks about his research. Some people in his, for example, he listed the journals he's published in and some of the awards when talking about his research. Notice here again how he specifically in this first paragraph describes the domain that he worked on in his PhD program. And notice again, this next paragraph talks about him being an instructor and what he was able to achieve there. And then this is that final like wrap up. This last paragraph is a little bit more important, but a little bit less important, but just kind of closing out your letter. Okay. So that's what a cover letter needs to look like. So here you can see that he didn't address this to a particular chair of the search committee. He had a more general greeting of the letter here. Okay, so with that being said, do you guys have any questions about cover letters that I can answer for you?
There's a question in the chat.
Okay.
It says, if you are particularly interested in a school, for example, because of location or proximity to family, would you want to briefly mention this in the cover letter?
I think anything about disclosing a family is entirely up to you. I would say if you want to bring it up, I would keep it light. Otherwise, I would say sort of keep that in one of the informs conversations or a Zoom interview. I would more casually mention it there, like, thank you for reaching out. I'm really excited about this opportunity because my spouse or my family or partner also has a job or lives near here. And so this is really at the top of my list. And I think that's something you would more mention in conversation than in the letter. But it's your packet and it's entirely up to you how you want to market yourself. Eduardo, do you have any other advice?
Yeah, I will save it for the first interview. Like typically they will ask you, why do you want to join our university and our department? And you don't want to bring that first. I mean, you want to talk about your work and connect that with the department. But as part of the answer, you can bring that also. You say, oh, and now actually I have these other motivation to be part of the school or the department.
Yeah, excellent advice.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's move on from cover letters and talk about CVs. CV is short for curriculum vitae. And again, there is no page limit here. It should be very easy for you to get access to a CV if you haven't found one, either from your colleagues or email me. I'm happy to send you one. Or your advisor can definitely help you here. One thing I want to say that, sorry, I'm tempted to actually still show mine here really quickly. one thing that I did not realize that someone had sort of told me to switch up. You of course always lead with your education. I think most of you would know that. But the two things that I want you to make sure on your CV going into the job market is that you have a section about your research interests. Whether it's as long as mine is here or just 2 bullet points, but you want to specify your research interest very early on in the document, and then immediately follow with your publications. Because unfortunately, like that's what a lot of places are still like really looking at is what is your publication count. So I actually want to briefly show Mustafa's here as well, because I really liked his, and now my CV actually reflects this as well. Oh no, he did. Yeah, okay. Well, he sort of did that here. I've seen some places. Let me just go back to mine briefly. So one of the things I've done here is like I've now numbered these J1, J2, and J3 for journal papers. R1 and R2 for like reviewed, those that are in review. M1 through M4 for manuscripts in preparation, and then C1 through C5 for conference proceedings. So I think that's a really helpful number, insisting that I've started to see on CVs, and I really, really like it. So you may not have things in all of these categories. This was mine when I went on the market. But again, I also did a postdoc at the time. So hopefully you've got something up here in the journals that you can put into play. So anyway, that's what I really wanted to say about CVs. Have a research interest section, immediately follow that with publications. Then after what you do after that, like teaching experience or presentations or courses you've taught, like you can teach or have taken, a lot of that ordering doesn't matter as much as these first couple of things. So I wanted to say that. And then, of course, you follow with honors and awards. That might be fairly early as well, but the ordering there doesn't matter as much. If you have been involved in any grants, you could actually have a section there. Some of you may actually have participated in the writing of grants, and so you can include those as well. And then also your service and memberships. But the order here, I think, is less important. Maybe you can decide what to put based on what you're more proud of or feel like you have better content for. Okay. Any questions on CVs? Okay. All right. So these next two things are, especially the research statement. Out of everything, the research statement is the most important, I think, for pretty much any institution that you're applying for. Unless you're going for you choose to go directly for a teaching position or a lecturer position, then I would say the teaching statement matters more there. But if you're going for a tenure track assistant professor, the research statement document matters the most. It is typically 1, 2, or sometimes 3 pages. When you start these, I highly advise that you get to the point. And the reason I say that is maybe applying to colleges or even applying to PhD programs, you may have been encouraged to start off with some philosophical quote or sort of like what got you involved in engineering or your specific field. Here, you really want to leave these off with the point. What is your research interest and domain, or what do you want to be interested in? Okay, hit that beat immediately. Ultimately, the purpose of the research statement is you're then going to describe your past/current research. Biggest tip here is to reference your own work. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. And then the last thing you're going to end this research statement with is describe your ideas for your future research. And so I want to take a moment to pause here and say something very important. When these search committees are interviewing you for the jobs, they're looking to see that you've hit what I refer to as a point of research maturity. Okay. That means that you have learned a lot from your advisor, but you're hitting that point where you are your own independent researcher and begin to build your own research program. We can easily tell if you're still worried about finishing the last part of your dissertation and that you've not yet begun to think about what it is that you want to work on, because you have to establish your career separate from your advisor. So it needs to be related, and it needs to, potentially tie into what you've been doing. But we want to see that you now have your own ideas and your own interests that you're going to be pursuing and writing grants for and writing publications for. We can pick up on that very easily. So make sure that you spend time thinking about that, and it's in this document. And that when you're on these interviews, whether they're at Informs or Zoom or on site, you're thinking about your future, and not still just trying to prove who you are or what you have done in your dissertation. Part of that maturity is that you're familiar with funding agencies. Now, we don't expect you to have personal relationships with all the program officers yet, but you need to have a conversation with your advisor or your mentors about what are some of the funding agencies that have funded their work, because that's likely who can potentially fund yours. And you need to get familiar with some program names here. That's easy to do in this research statement because you can have those conversations, do your background research and write it in. But make sure that later on, when you are on interviews, that you haven't forgotten that information, because they'll ask you, who can fund your research? Do you know any specific programs at NSF that you may be interested in applying to? Okay. So again, if that's overwhelming to you, then that's something that I'm warning you about this summer, so you can be prepared for it in the fall when you start to have these conversations. Okay. All right. So let's look at an example research statement. Okay. So mine here is 2 pages. Also, one other thing, make sure this is less important in the digital age, but make sure your name is on every single document. Even your references, like when you have your references, make sure your name is at the top of every single document in some way. Don't submit any. So even on the second page here, make sure your name is appearing at the top of these statements. So that's another tip I wanted to mention. Okay, so for these research statements, again, get to the point very quickly. This is what my research interests are. Okay. Then I spent some time talking about my dissertation work and giving a nice summary there of what I did. Mine again is a little bit longer because I spent time as a postdoc and a visiting assistant professor before going on the market. So I talk about that. Again, I think naturally sort of like what you want to say here will come into play. So I think the biggest thing that I want to bring to you is the sort of this future idea of what you're working on. And when I talk about future research, if you're working on some algorithms, maybe you have some new ideas for like optimality cuts that you want to work on, or maybe you have this methodology and you've been applying it to one domain and now you're going to shift and apply it to another domain, and it's going to be innovative there because of X, Y, and Z. You can mention those things. So you don't want to just say like, I'm in this area and now I'm going to leave it behind and never look back and go to this other completely new area. Like that's not smart to do here at this stage of your career. So there needs to be some kind of like pivot with your foot still sort of in the door of like where you have been working. Okay. But this is when I read these and I'm short on time, I jump down here to the bottom and I want to see what is it that you're going to be bringing to our department. What are you, if you come and join and you're now my colleague, what is it you're going to be known for? Is that something that we need? Are your ideas exciting? That's what I'm looking for here at the bottom. The other thing that you want to say here about is who can potentially fund your research. Mention those. Another thing that I did, I worked in healthcare, and I actually would mention I would change this part of my I would customize this part of my letter, whether I was depending on which department I was submitting to, but I would actually quickly Google what are some hospitals or healthcare systems in that area, and I would write it in here. Most of your letter, 98 to 99% of these statements, you don't have to rewrite every time, but I always took a couple of things. So in the research statement, it was going to be the hospitals that I worked with. And then on my teaching statement, it was the names of specific courses I could teach. I would customize those for every department. So I actually, in my initial draft, I would actually kept it highlighted in red and italicized. So I would know to go in and change that every time. And then put it back to normal black text. Okay. So that's another tip. I mean, that works for healthcare, but maybe if you're not in healthcare, maybe there's other industry partners in the area or just something, even if it's not in that particular city, maybe just in the state that you could work with. That would be exciting for you to partner with if you were to take a job at that particular department and university. Okay, so the other thing that I want to point out here, when I said in the slide that you want to reference your own work, I actually, to really highlight my publications or my conference proceedings, I listed those in my research statement. So they're actually listed here as a footnote reference. And so you can see me cite those in the text. And if you happen to have a lot, again, I'm going to show you Mustafa's here as well. He actually cited his, you see, you can see 9, 10, 3. And then he put this remark at the bottom that they actually follow the numbering in his CV. Okay, so I've seen that approach as well. Okay. He also put some headings in these. He did a 3-page statement, so he actually put some headings in his, which can be useful. So this is sort of like what he does. This is more details about his past work. And then down here, this is a future plan. Okay. So that's a quick overview about what a research statement is. Do you guys have any questions?
There was a pending question from the previous section. This person asking if I have experience in industry, is it recommended to mention it if I go for an academic job, like in the CV?
Yes, I definitely. So notice in if you're talking about the CV specifically,
or in the cover letter.
Yeah, so the CV, there's definitely a section. I think I've already closed mine, but right after education, there's professional positions. So for mine, I had my postdoc listed, and but if you've been in industry, have a section that says professional positions and include your industry there. In the cover letter, yeah, I would definitely mention it, because for me, as someone who's been on search committees now, again, that's something that for me, that's a positive, that I think lends some credibility as far as maturity in terms of the experience that you have, that could give you a leg up on getting certain grants because you have these connections, or you're very familiar with some of the challenging problems in that particular industry. So yeah, it's worth mentioning in my opinion.
Also from the teaching perspective, if you have experience, I think is worth mentioning. You're not only bringing the academic perspective, but also the industry experience to the classroom. So I think it's worth mentioning.
Mhm.
Good afternoon. I have a question. I have two questions actually. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the first question is related to the CV. After the education, you mentioned that we should write research interest, right? Something like that, if I remember well.
Yeah. So I'm talking about on the CV.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would have a research interest section. Mine was a little longer, but let's see. Yeah, I mean, Mustafa's was longer as well. So it's just a quick footnote, highlight, bulleted section or numbered section on what are the main topics that you work on.
Okay, so yeah, my question was exactly that one. How long should it be? And I mean, and what exactly we have to add there? I can see that you added like a title and also a script description about.
I would have
yeah.
I would have a phrase of some sort. You can see here Mustafa bolded his three things, and then you can put something a little bit longer. In mine, let's see, where did mine go?
Yeah, and also related to the same, the research interest should be related to something that we have done or something that we would like to do. Or both.
Both. I would say both. Yeah,
Okay.
I would definitely say both.
Okay.
That's why there tends to be a couple, is it might be that you still have some ideas about how you want to extend what you've been working on. But then I would also list, like, again, these are your interests, right? Not what you're already established your career in. So you can list one or two things that you intend to work on.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. And the other question is about this video, I mean, record. Where can we find this record later? Is there any way that you could share with us or something to just recheck it later?
That's a good question. I think last time we had a workshop, we posted in the webpage, the MIF webpage. So if Michelle allows us to post it there, we can post it there, or I will discuss with Michelle to see what would be the best way to post it and share it.
Okay, thank you so much. So I expect receiving an email from you that you're going to share. I mean, you're going to tell us where we can find the video, or should I?
Yeah, we will see. We will. If you're part of BIF, you will get a message from the Inforce Connect.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And I'm hesitant to post all of my materials just publicly on MIF, but if those of you that are here want to email me, I'm happy to send you these examples as well, like the ones that I'm showing. I'm happy to send those to you. Okay, as well as the slides. Okay, so moving on to the teaching statement, which is the last one we're going to go into detail here on today. So teaching statement, also about 1 to 2 pages. There's a bit, compared to the research statement, my opinion is there's a bit more freedom in what you're writing here. Because here you actually are encouraged to speak a little bit more about your philosophy, like what is your teaching philosophy. And so spend some time brainstorming and thinking about what it means to you, whether you've had experience or you haven't had experience, but you've just been a student for all these years. Like, what is it that's important to you that you want to bring into the classroom if and when you get that chance? So the things that you should also have there is definitely highlight courses that you have taught. Again, being the primary instructor is great. On the job market this year, there's not much you can do about changing that. But for those of you that are just here to get some information, you have some time to talk to your advisor and see if you can actually be a primary instructor for a course. But if you have that experience, whether it's primary instructor or teaching some labs or holding some review sessions as a TA, comment on some lessons learned there. So especially if there was a challenging situation that you had to deal with, how did you problem solve that and reach a peaceful resolution, if you will. Mention definitely say the two things that needs to be at the bottom there though are for that particular department. So this is the part that needs to be customized on the teaching statement. What can you teach at that department, both at the graduate and undergraduate level? And what additional courses could you develop for that department? Okay, that means that you need to go in and do a little bit of ground research to see if you can pull up their list of courses or their degree plan for their bachelor's degree and see what it is that you can teach. And that it's in red there because that's something that needs to be in the teaching statement. So let's look at some examples here. So mine is a bit longer because I did have a primary instructor opportunity when I was a PhD student, but by the time I was a visiting professor, I think I had taught about 3 or 4 courses total at the time I was going on the market. So I was able to say a lot there. So I start off with something, again, a little bit more philosophical. So unlike the research statement, you don't have to quickly get to the point here. You can actually talk about as that has informed your teaching style or philosophy. But eventually see in there is what is it that you have taught? Definitely make sure you call out the course numbers because that definitely draws our eyes to that section of their writing more so than just a bunch of text. Be specific, like I mentioned how many students I had taught. So that gives them an idea of like what class sizes you've been able to handle before in the past. I actually wrote some, I put in some of my teaching evaluation scores, but I also from the comment section, and again, you get to cherry pick here, some of the better comments that maybe you have had from the reviews that if you have been the primary instructor. Now, regarding evaluations, if you are teaching in the fall, or you're not actually teaching, but you've just been a TA, you are still allowed to create a Qualtrics survey or a Google survey and send to students and try to collect some data to put into these teaching statements. Okay, so the reason I say that is if you're teaching in the fall, like at UF, we actually have midterm evaluations that you can opt into. And so you can here you could make sure that you do those, so you collect some data, or again, you can send out your own survey, quickly make your own survey timeline to get some data that you can put into this. And again, that's whether you're a primary instructor or you're just a TA, teaching some labs or again, doing some review sessions. Try to collect some data that you can put into here. It's going to be, I think, worth the effort if you have the time to do that. Now, the other thing that, so this was suggested to me and I did it here, but I was applying to engineering schools where you need to apply. It's highly encouraged that you attempt to go for the NSF Career Award. So I actually put my thoughts into here as far as initial thoughts on how I could bring that education component into my research grants as well. So that's just a side tip if you know what I'm talking about. Now, also too, so another thing that I did mention here, I was involved in some like student case competitions when I was an officer as a student. And so I mentioned those connections there. But the last thing you want to end with, and it could be a bigger paragraph than this, you want to end with what is it that you want to teach? Now, I took some, maybe Eduardo and Clara can chime in here too. Sometimes I was very specific, especially if that department had a website and I could actually call out specific course titles. That's also a bit risky sometimes because some departments have courses listed on there that they actually no longer really offer anymore. So sometimes it's a bit tricky to be very, very specific. Ultimately, like what one of the strategies that I took. So being in all of my degrees were in industrial engineering, and I was applying to a lot of industrial engineering departments. So when I was doing that, I would just sort of remind them my background is in industrial engineering. And so I feel comfortable teaching a large number of courses in your department, but I'm most interested in teaching, linear programming and simulation. And that's actually important because, and I've seen that more so being on faculty search committees, is that you've got people who actually have backgrounds in electrical or mechanical and that eventually have sort of like focused their graduate studies on this field. And so then knowing that they were electrical engineering by training as their bachelor's degree, they may not be familiar with all the courses that industrial engineering department has. So that's worth mentioning if you have that connection, if your background is in the actual department that you're applying for. But again, it's also bad form, I think, to just say like, oh, I can teach anything. They want to know what you want to teach and what you're most excited about teaching. So that's why I took that strategy of like, my background is in this, so I could teach many things, but I'm most interested in teaching, and then name 2 or 3 courses. Take a look at their graduate programs as well, and name what it is that what courses you feel like you can teach. And then I think this is just unwritten, but I'm telling you now, you should always, always, always list what courses you could develop for them, both at the graduate and undergraduate level. So for me, I had 2 strategies. I was looking to see if they had some advanced optimization courses that I could mention. So I teach stochastic programming. So I was looking at that. The other thing is I work in healthcare. And so a lot of schools were interested in developing tracks in healthcare or certificate programs in healthcare. And so I'd look to see if there was a course I can develop there. So that's what I suggest. So, and then you just kind of wrap it up nicely with how you feel like you could contribute to their department. So those are my tips on that. Let me also see if Mustafa's, so he had a 1-page teaching statement. Again, he was coming, he had less teaching experience than I did. So we didn't have all of those course eval metrics to put in there. And so that's one of the reasons his was a bit shorter, but you can see that he definitely ends his in the same way. And this is the part that, again, if I'm short on time, I jump to the bottom and read this section. What courses do you think you can teach for a department, and what courses can you develop? Okay. So that's my tips on teaching statements. Are there any questions?
We have a couple of minutes for questions. Well, if there's no questions, then I want to say thank you to Michelle. Thank you for your time. Thank you for putting together this nice workshop. And we are going to make sure that this information is shared with our community. So we'll discuss with Michelle the most appropriate way to share the video, and then we'll send a message to everybody so you can get access to the information. I don't know if Clara and Michelle has some final words.
No, thank you everybody for attending the webinar. And I don't have any other comment. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for having me. If you do have some other questions about the other things that I wasn't able to get there, especially like ideas for who should be your references, or what needs to be in a diversity statement, I'm happy to share these slides with you, and again, the examples. And so I just dropped my email into the chat. You can also Google me through my department, but that's my email if you want to email me directly. But thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
I have just one question.
Sure.
And it's about actually the diversity statement. It says they're new, so that means that not all universities and departments are asking for that.
No, they're not. So it's just more of like, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you, and how is it that you acknowledge and make that part of your research and your teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very flexible statement, and it's really just, I mean, if you are a minority, then that should bring a lot of content and perspective into what you're writing. But even if you're not, how is it that you have or plan to create a more inclusive classroom, or recruit minority students perhaps into your research program, things like that.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. All right.
No more questions. So again, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for everybody for attending, and look forward for more events like this within the MIF community. And if you're not part of MIF, please consider joining the forum. It is you can go into informs.com and get the inform.org and then register for the forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.